No oxygen tanks, no backup plan. Just wooden oars, pig bladders that probably still smelled like breakfast, and an alchemist's chemistry trick that supposedly kept them breathing for hours like it was no big deal. This was the world's first working submarine, built with materials you could literally buy at a medieval tannery while picking up your winter boots. We're diving into how Cornelis Drebbel solved problems that would make modern engineers curl into the fetal position, why the King of England might have risked his royal behind in this leather death trap of destiny, and how this absolutely insane Renaissance invention laid the groundwork for every nuclear submarine cruising the oceans today. Keep watching, because the air-refreshing secret he discovered is still debated by historians who can't believe it actually works. Meet Cornelis Drebbel, a Dutch glassworker and part-time alchemist who showed up in England around 1604 with craftsman skills and ideas so completely bonkers that people probably checked his luggage for prohibited substances. He'd already impressed King James I with a self-winding atmospheric clock and some optical tricks that made courtiers' brains do little backflips. Parlor magic stuff, party entertainment for people whose idea of Netflix was watching someone make a lens. But that was just the warm-up act, the opening band before the main concert of madness. Drebbel had been thinking about something W-A bigger and W-A stranger, the kind of idea that gets you either knighted or committed. He wanted to make a boat that could travel underwater, not sink dramatically like every other boat that meets its tragic end. Travel, with people inside, alive, still breathing, hearts still beating, the full package. In 1620, this was like casually proposing teleportation at a town hall meeting while everyone's still figuring out basic plumbing. The science barely existed, like we're still not entirely sure what air is levels of barely. The materials were so primitive you could argue rocks were cutting-edge technology. And yet Drebbel was about to build this underwater death machine using wood, animal fat, leather, and pig bladders, materials that sound more like a Renaissance cooking recipe than submarine components. The man was either a forgotten genius whose brain operated on frequencies we still can't measure, or spectacularly lucky in ways that defy probability itself. Maybe both. Probably both. And honestly, the fact that it actually worked and didn't immediately become an underwater tomb is the wildest part of this whole absolutely ridiculous story. So here's the world Drebbel is working in, the geopolitical nightmare that's about to birth underwater warfare. Naval warfare is exploding like the world's most expensive fireworks show. Countries are building bigger ships, heavier cannons that could punch holes through castle walls, faster fleets that turn the ocean into a terrifying demolition derby. Everyone's fighting on the surface with massive floating fortresses blasting each other with artillery in what can only be described as expensive murder boats, the genre. Drebbel looks at this entire arms race, this surface-level chaos of wooden ships trying to outboom each other, and thinks, wait for it, what if we just went under? What if we built something that could slip beneath enemy ships undetected like the world's sneakiest underwater ghost? Revolutionary concept that would change warfare forever. Absolutely terrifying execution that sounds like elaborate suicide plan. While you're thinking about whether you'd trust greased leather 15 feet underwater with nothing but pig bladders between you and a watery grave, drop a comment with what you think that recruitment pitch sounded like. Hey, want to seal yourself in darkness and maybe not die? And hit subscribe, because the engineering solution he came up with is genuinely brilliant in ways that'll make you question why we ever doubted this magnificent lunatic. He starts with a wooden frame, basically an oversized rowboat that looks like it wandered away from a fishing village, and covers the entire thing in greased leather. That's the waterproofing. Greased leather. Animal skin coated in fat like the world's least appetizing burrito wrapper. Would you trust your life to that 15 feet underwater where the Thames could decide at any moment to demonstrate what structural failure means? The crew didn't exactly have options, probably because anyone with better options was safely on land making reasonable life choices. He cuts a watertight hatch for entry, watertight being a very optimistic description, adds a rudder for steering because you might as well control your descent into madness, and here's where the engineering gets interesting in ways that make modern submarine designers weep with confused respect: the oars. The rowers are sealed inside this leather cocoon like the world's worst chrysalis experience, and their oars somehow have to extend through the hull to propel the thing without immediately flooding the cabin and drowning everyone in the opening act. Drebbel creates flexible leather seals around each oar, loose enough to allow rowing motion without ripping someone's arms off, tight enough to keep the Thames from pouring in like an unwelcome dinner guest. It's brilliantly simple and completely bonkers at the same time, the kind of solution that makes you go, that's either genius or the dumbest thing ever conceived, and the answer is somehow both. But that's just propulsion, the easy part that only required leather engineering wizardry. Now the really hard problems that would make modern engineers stress eat their blueprints. How do you make it sink without it becoming a permanent underwater sculpture? How do you make it rise before everyone runs out of air and becomes a tragic historical footnote? Based on limited historical descriptions that sound like they were written by witnesses still processing their trauma, Drebbel likely used pig bladders as ballast tanks. Actual pig bladders serving as critical life-or-death submarine equipment. Large pigskin bladders installed under the rowers' seats like the world's worst cushions, connected by pipes to the river outside in a plumbing system that would give modern engineers anxiety attacks. Want to descend into the murky depths? Open the pipes, let the bladders fill with water, feel the weight pull you down toward the riverbed like gravity just remembered you exist. Want to surface before you become a permanent river decoration? Manually squeeze the bladders to force the water back out using pure human strength and desperation. So you've got 12 exhausted men rowing in complete darkness like they're speedrunning physical breakdown, while simultaneously sitting on water-filled pig bladders that determine whether they live or died. They're supposed to compress these bladders on command while rowing like they're multitasking in the world's deadliest job interview. The job interview must have been fascinating, possibly the only time previous experience with pig bladders became a valuable resume skill. Then there's the air problem, the killer that doesn't care about your fancy leather seals or impressive rowing technique. Literally the thing that will end you. Drebbel installs snorkel-like tubes that extend above the waterline, held up by flotation devices in a design that sounds theoretically sound until reality intervenes. Fresh air flows down in a beautiful stream of life-giving oxygen. Clever plan that works perfectly in calm conditions, except, plot twist, waves exist. One good surge and you're inhaling Thames water instead of oxygen, enjoying a refreshing drink of river that was definitely not on the menu. And even with the snorkels working perfectly in ideal conditions that never actually happen, the air inside would only last maybe 30 minutes before carbon dioxide buildup would start suffocating everyone in a very unpleasant death by chemistry scenario. Half an hour. That's your entire window between functioning submarine and underwater coffin. So how did the submarine supposedly stay submerged for hours during demonstrations while crowds watched from shore wondering if they were witnessing history or a mass drowning? This is where things get really interesting and historically murky in ways that make historians throw up their hands and start arguments at conferences. According to a later account by scientist Robert Boyle, who heard this secondhand like the world's most important game of telephone, Drebbel reportedly discovered something incredible that sounds like actual magic. He found that heating saltpeter, potassium nitrate, released something that refreshed the air like opening a window in an airtight death chamber. If this actually happened, he was accidentally generating oarsmen centuries before the element was even identified by science, before anyone knew what they were breathing or why stopping made you dead. We don't know exactly how accurate Boyle's second-hand account is, and historians still debate whether this actually against simile space or not helps from consideration and less much more problem. He understood chemical reactions in ways most people didn't, probably because most people were busy not accidentally poisoning themselves with experimental chemistry, and somehow, whether through this saltpeter method or another technique lost to history like the world's most important deleted file, his submarine stayed down way longer than 30 minutes of stale air should have allowed without everyone passing out and becoming a tragic statistic. That's either incredible chemistry that predates scientific understanding by centuries, brilliant ventilation design that makes modern engineers jealous, or both working together in ways we still can't fully explain. Drebbel builds 3 versions between 1620 and 1624, each one larger and more capable, like he's speed-running submarine evolution while everyone else is still processing that underwater boats are possible. The final model could reportedly carry around 16 people, including rowers, turning his experimental death capsule into a legitimate underwater people hauler, and then comes the demonstration that makes him famous, or should have made him legendary if history had any sense of proper credit distribution. He takes the submarine out on the Thames River for public trials, traveling underwater while thousands of Londoners watch from shore like it's the Renaissance equivalent of a space launch. But here's what we know for certain, the undebatable facts that even skeptical historians accept. People watched a leather-covered boat disappear beneath the water like it was swallowed by the river itself. And waited. And waited. For a really long time that probably felt like eternity for anyone with money riding on the outcome. Long enough that the crowd had to be wondering if everyone just drowned in the world's most public submarine failure, if they were watching history or tragedy unfold in real time. When the submarine finally surfaced with the entire crew alive, still breathing, not drowned or suffocated, it caused a sensation that rippled through London like a shockwave. And here's where the story enters legendary territory that historians still fight about. According to later accounts, though not confirmed by contemporary sources that would make this historical fact instead of possible propaganda, King James I himself reportedly decided to take a ride in this greased leather tube of questionable safety. Think about this scene for a second. Really visualize the absolute madness. The actual King of England, probably in fancy royal clothing worth more than the submarine itself, climbing into a greased leather rowboat to voluntarily sink into the Thames like he's got backup lives. The courtiers must have been absolutely panicking, probably drafting succession plans while trying not to scream. If this really happened, and we'll probably never know for sure because historical records are frustratingly vague, James became the first monarch to travel underwater, unlocking an achievement nobody knew existed. Either spectacularly brave in ways that redefine courage, or magnificently foolish in ways that make you question royal decision-making. Whether you think this king story is real history or royal propaganda designed to make James look adventurous, drop your theory in the comments, because historians are still arguing about this. And if you're hooked on this insanity that somehow passes for real history, subscribe, because the submarines that came after somehow got even deadlier in ways that make Drebbel's leather coffin look safe by comparison. Now let's talk about the submarines that came after Drebbel. Because oh boy did things get catastrophically worse before they got better, like submarine design went through a how many ways can we kill people phase. The Turtle, built in 1776 during the American Revolution by someone who clearly didn't learn from previous underwater disasters, was the first submarine used in actual combat. One-man operation, because apparently the lesson was, let's make it even more claustrophobic. Egg-shaped wooden vessel designed to sneak up to British ships and attach explosives like the world's sneakiest underwater demolition expert. Sergeant Ezra Lee volunteered for the mission, which raises serious questions about military recruitment tactics. He climbed inside this wooden egg of questionable buoyancy, hand-cranked his way underwater in complete darkness toward a British warship while probably questioning every life choice that led to this moment, positioned himself directly underneath it with the precision of someone who really doesn't want to mess this up, and started drilling to attach the bomb in what should have been his moment of glory. The drill couldn't penetrate the hull reinforcement, bouncing off like it hit solid bedrock. He sat there in pitch blackness, cranked desperately like his life depended on it. It did, drill spinning uselessly against metal in the most frustrating failure imaginable. He had to hand crank all the way back to shore in defeat. Probably the longest, most embarrassing underwater commute in military history. The conversation when he surfaced must have been spectacularly awkward, like explaining why you came back empty-handed from the impossible suicide mission everyone expected you to die attempting. Then there's the H.L. Hunley from the American Civil War, a 40-foot iron submarine with 7 men hand-cranking a propeller plus 1 pilot steering in what can only be described as the world's deadliest group exercise class. This thing sank twice during testing, each time killing the entire crew in what should have been a clear sign to maybe reconsider the design. And each time, they'd raise it from the harbor floor like salvaging a very expensive underwater coffin, clean out the bodies in what must have been the worst job in the Confederate Navy, recruit a new crew of people apparently unfamiliar with the concept of learning from past mistakes, and try again like the definition of insanity was their operational manual. The final mission in 1864 was technically successful in the narrowest possible definition of that word. It became the first combat submarine to sink an enemy warship, the USS Housatonic, in a genuine military achievement that should have been celebrated. Back to Drebbel, whose submarine suddenly looks incredibly safe by comparison. Despite demonstrating a working submarine that could carry over a dozen people underwater for extended periods without immediately killing them, despite amazing the King of England in a demonstration that should have changed everything, despite proving the concept to thousands of witnesses who watched this impossible thing actually work, the technology wasn't adopted by naval forces in what might be history's biggest missed opportunity. Naval commanders in the 1620s had genuine interest, probably watched the demonstrations thinking this could change warfare forever, but couldn't figure out how to integrate something so slow and limited in range into existing warfare strategies that relied on big boats shooting big cannons. The technology was too strange, too experimental, too far ahead of military thinking that was still figuring out basic naval tactics. Despite Drebbel's success that should have revolutionized naval warfare immediately, practical submarine development stalled for over a century like someone hit pause on underwater innovation, with only occasional theoretical proposals from people who drew submarines but didn't actually build the terrifying thing until the Turtle arrived 150 years later to prove submarines could still kill you in new creative ways. Drebbel died in November 1633 in poverty, still known in scientific circles but without his submarine achievements gaining military adoption or making him rich. The inventor of the world's first working submarine, underappreciated in his time in a pattern so common it's basically the inventor's curse, which is honestly a crime because this guy figured out something incredible that was centuries ahead of its time. The real breakthrough wasn't just building a leather-covered boat that could submerge without immediately flooding, turning into an underwater brick, and drowning everyone in the opening scene. Plenty of people had theorized about that, drawn diagrams, made proposals that looked good on paper. The breakthrough was solving the AIR problem, the invisible killer, the thing that would suffocate you long before drowning ever got its chance to be the cause of death. whether Drebbel actually heated saltpeter to generate oxygen in a chemistry hack that predates scientific understand, or used some other method we've lost to history, like the world's most important forgotten recipe, he figured out how to keep people breathing underwater, in a sealed vessel where air should run out in 30 minutes. That's what separated his submarine from pure fantasy, from theoretical drawings that never leave the page. The pigskin bladder ballast system, that gave him depth control that let him sink and surface on command. The leather seals on the oar, that gave him propulsion that moved the submarine through water instead of just sitting there like an underwater rock. The snorkel tubes, those gave him supplemental fresh air when conditions were perfect and waves weren't trying to drown everyone. But whatever he did to extend the breathable atmosphere, whatever magic or chemistry or brilliant ventilation he figured out, that gave him time, the precious resource that keeps functioning submarine from becoming underwater tomb. Those public demonstrations on the Thames, witnessed by thousands who couldn't believe what they were seeing, traveling underwater for periods that should have been impossible with 1620s technology that barely understood what air was, they only worked because Drebbel solved the suffocation problem that would have killed everyone in the first 30 minutes. Without that, everyone dies gasping in darkness and the submarine becomes a one-time use coffin. Compare Drebbel's first submarine to modern nuclear subs, and the gap is almost incomprehensible, like comparing a wooden cart to a spacecraft. Today's submarines generate oxygen through electrolysis of seawater in a process so refined it's basically magic, maintain perfect atmospheric control that keeps everyone comfortable and alive, navigate with sonar and GPS that make underwater travel safer than driving, stay submerged for months at a time without surfacing like they've forgotten what the sky looks like, carry crews of over 100 three-year people living in underwater cities, and can launch intercontinental ballistic missiles that make them floating apocalypse machines. Drebbel's crew had greased leather that probably leaked, pig bladders that required manual squeezing, snorkel tubes that worked until a wave came, and whatever air-refreshing technique he'd figured out that might have been oxygen generation or might have been something else entirely. But look at the evolutionary logic, the direct line from Renaissance leather tubes to modern nuclear behemoths. The ballast system, filling and emptying compartments to control depth without turning the submarine into a permanent ocean floor decoration. Modern subs still use that exact same fundamental principle, just with sophisticated pumps and computers instead of manually squeezed pig bladders and desperate human effort. The need for atmosphere control, managing air quality so everyone doesn't suffocate in an enclosed space. Nuclear subs still chemically scrub carbon dioxide and generate oxygen, just with better chemistry than whatever Drebbel was doing with his mysterious saltpeter technique. The propulsion challenge, making a sealed vessel move through water instead of just sinking like a rock with ambitions. Nuclear reactors replaced hand cranking in the biggest upgrade in human history, but the core problem Drebbel solved remains identical 4 centuries later. The structural integrity issue, keeping water pressure from crushing the hull and turning everyone inside into compressed human paste. Modern steel and titanium replaced greased leather in what might be the most obvious improvement ever made, but the engineering challenge is exactly the same. Stay sealed without flooding, control depth without becoming a permanent underwater feature, maintain breathable air without suffocating everyone, propel forward without relying on currents, surface alive instead of as a recovery operation. Drebbel solved all of them with Renaissance technology that sounds like it came from a medieval hardware store and materials you could buy at a tannery while picking up saddles. Everything since has just been refinement, better solutions to problems he already cracked. Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, when you realize modern submarines are just fancy versions of a greased leather tube 1620. So next time you hear about cutting-edge nuclear submarines with advanced stealth technology that makes them invisible, intercontinental strike capability that makes them floating military bases, and life support systems that rival space stations, remember it all started with 12 guys sealed in darkness that would drive modern people insane. Rowing a greased leather boat through the Thames while squeezing pig bladders between their legs like the world's worst workout routine, and praying the alchemist's air trick kept working because the alternative was suffocating in complete darkness. Here's the real question that separates the brave from the sensible. Would you have been the first volunteer to test Drebbel's submarine, knowing absolutely nothing about whether humans could even survive underwater, whether this was